Okay, so hi Jennifer, thank you
Hi.
for joining us. Can you start by just telling us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I like to refer to myself as a LGBTQ affirmative and inclusive couple and family therapist. I originally trained at Syracuse University. I went through the master's and doctoral program there, and we have a gender expansive and diverse treatment team there. That gives the therapists obviously the opportunity to do a lot of this work and to learn about what it's like and how to best support clients in these communities. Um, and so it was my passion prior to, I think, becoming a therapist, and it's a part of who I am. And so I carried that through to my dissertation work, which was the precursor to the article that your students read. It's been greatly reduced in size for a page limit for JMFT, but it reflects my, I guess, personal and professional philosophies and theories that I use, and also reflects my research interests and what a lot of my clinical work looks like too.
Awesome. So I think, well, just out of curiosity, how many pages was your dissertation?
Oh gosh, I don't have it in front of me, but I feel like it was in the 280 range, 286 or something
Yeah,
like that.
sounds,
Every little page matters, when you
oh,
get
yeah, that's brutal. Reduced down to like a what, 30-page manuscript?
Yeah, I think they ended up giving us 32 or 33. They were nice to me. But that was a yeoman's task. You were highly helpful with that, by the way.
Oh,
Thank
I'm a
you.
very good slasher.
Mhm.
Oh, thank you. So you've touched on this a little bit, but can you tell us what made you interested in this particular study?
Mhm. So I was finding that I don't know how this happened. I truly sort of believe this is possibly some kind of phenomenon that I haven't uncovered yet. But I was finding that most of my cases were with trans feminine folks. And that could be because I'm a cis woman. I don't know. I think part of me sometimes thought that that would make someone uncomfortable. But then I sort of had different clinical experiences with my clients where that made them more comfortable and that made them feel really safe. So I thought that was pretty awesome. And I I think that trans femininity is such a complex topic to begin with. I was really interested in uncovering more about what those experiences are. And I also have a real passion for couples work. And I have an integrative theory that I use with couples. And nobody talks about trans including couples very much.
Mhm.
We have some older literature. We don't have a lot that's current. And I thought it was really time to have something that was more current and more specific and also really strengths based. I think maybe a lot of the literature from 10 years ago or so is just talking about this, a transition being this big, huge upheaval and this, painful thing, which, yes, is true sometimes, but we're not talking about the flip side of everything. Like, so what are the strengths? Like, when are the stories really positive, and what is it that keeps couples together?
I love that.
Yeah,
Can you tell me a little bit about your integrative framework for therapy?
sure.
Because that seems to have formed a framework for your
Yeah.
research questions, right?
Yes, and you can reference my article. It's out there.
Yes.
That was a complicated one, I think, articulating that, like, for an article that it originally came from a conference presentation. So so I am like this sort of I feel like I have this dual thing happening that's really fluid in terms of my theory of couples. And so I'm an attachment based and attachment informed therapist. I'm also really into contextual theory of family therapy. And the two really converge on a lot of core concepts, like the idea of trust, for example. And safety, and so I think they really lend themselves well to an integration, and contextual is not explicitly, but when you really think about it, is very social justice oriented. And attachment obviously can be as well. And so I think those two theories really speak to me personally. And so I kind of move back and forth between them, with also this sort of social justice lens that I have.
Love it. Thank you. We talk a lot or I should say I talk a lot in my classes about integrating theories and models and sort of how to do so very intentionally,
Yeah.
um, not kind of grab bag. And it sounds like you focus on these core assumptions and these core premises to the two models that really overlap and kind of built your integration around that.
Mhm.
I really
Yeah,
appreciate
I think it's so many theories are really great integrated, right? There's so many possibilities out there, but I
it.
think you have to look at what the core premises are, like what are the pillars of the theory, and
Mhm.
make sure that they're not fighting with each other, that they have to be complementary in order for them to really work together.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you will be doing the grab bag thing.
Yeah. And you'll
Yeah.
get like turned around and stuck and feel
Yeah,
lost. Mhm.
right. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So can you tell me what your research questions were here, and then how what you wanted to know influenced how you did the study? So how did your research questions influence your methodology?
Yeah. So I have so many ideas. I'm thinking about my dissertation defense actually. That just brought up.
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
Definitely don't have to answer it to that level
It,
at
it was
all.
a good. I know it was a good thing. Um, so the research question here is: what are the experiences of transgender women, and their cisgender partners around emotional bond and fairness? I didn't phrase it exactly that way, but that's essentially what the research question is.
Mhm.
Um, and so I started with that research question, which is clinically informed for me,
Mhm.
right? And then with the kind of study that I am doing, that so that research question matches up with the methodology that I used, right? Because it's a really broad question. It's a what are the experiences, right? So we don't know. I'm not starting with any premise around that other than the theories that are informing that question. So emotional bond is informed by attachment theory. The concept of fairness is informed by contextual theory. So
Right, but you
yeah,
don't but you don't have any, like, pre-existing hypotheses
right.
about how those would be related to each other, which is why it's not a quantitative study,
Yeah,
right? It's a qualitative study.
exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. If it were quantitative, there would have needed to have been so much more already known about it, survey instruments, a ton of other research, right, to draw from. We just don't have that. We're not even there yet. So this really made more sense given as I was looking through the literature, what there was versus what there wasn't. Um, and I kind of view this study as the start to um, something else, right? That, we could quantify this at some point, if we did it right, and thought about it, or maybe we can quantify a piece of it. Maybe there's some branches from here that we can take and explore further.
Yeah, I love that. Now,
Yeah.
why did you choose to interview couples? Why not just the trans women? Why not split
Mhm.
them up? Why did you wanna interview them together?
There's so many arguments for and against on this one, as I've found out, um, from reviewers.
Yeah.
So I have to be systemic in my thinking, right? As a couple and family therapist, that's just textbook, and um, probably a really easy reason is, this was my dissertation and it had to be systemic. Like there was no other way that I could really accomplish that. I think if I had interviewed them separately, and then I would have had two sets of data, right? And in an attempt to merge them. And I don't feel that fit with the research question at all, because when you think systemically about this and interpersonal processes, right, a trans woman's experience in a partnership, right, is going to inform, her or their partner's experience of the relationship and vice versa. um, so I think that was the main reason.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And so
Okay.
did the so you I mean, you got to witness kind of the interpersonal dynamics and communication between the partners, which is additional information really in
Mhm.
itself. How
Yeah.
did that kind of influence how you interpreted the findings?
So that was an added layer of interpretation on this. IPA, or interpretative phenomenological analysis, um, is is about interpretation of interpretation, right? And this sort of circle that happens, in a constant motion. Um, and so I think, I was really tuned into that. I mean, I think being a therapist helped me be tuned into that, for one, and being able to experience partners responding to each other,
Mhm.
right? And thinking about, okay, so is one of them responding more? Is that because they're just more talkative, right? Or um, is it because of some other dynamic in the relationship, right? And so that helped me also, not map the interviews, that's not the right word, but sort of like move through them in a way that felt like equitable as well, making sure that I was getting information, and enough information, from both partners.
Mhm.
There was one couple that ended up, breaking up between the time of my initial interview and the sort of member check follow-up interview that I did, and I could feel that difference in that interview versus the other 6.
Yeah.
That was really evident with them.
Mm.
Um, so I think that helped
Mhm.
in terms of how the findings were interpreted, and what we were thinking about.
Yeah. So that serve as like a kind of a negative case
Mhm.
where, yeah, some of the themes weren't present the same way for that couple. And as it
Exactly.
turns out, they broke up. So the
Yeah.
themes you were looking for were really themes tied to resiliency. And so
Mhm.
obviously that wasn't as present with that couple because that relationship wasn't as resilient.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you interviewed 7 couples, so
Yes.
14 people in your
Mhm.
study. Um, Tell me about the number 7, because in quantitative research, right? In quantitative research, we've got these huge samples, and
Uh-huh.
obviously it's a little different in qualitative.
Yeah.
So can you just like tell us a little bit about what is an appropriate sample size
Mhm.
for your study?
Usually, sometimes you see 4 to 10, sometimes you see 6 to 10, with this particular methodology. That's different. So IPA sample size will be different from like a grounded theory qualitative method sample size. And that's because grounded theory is focused on building a theory. We're not focused on building a theory here. We're focused on this really rich, in-depth, detailed understanding of a unique lived experience. That's the goal. And I think the philosophers who came up with this methodology, right, really believed that if sure, could you get consensus if you had like 20 couples? Yeah, you probably could, but there probably would be a lot of detail missed. With this methodology, you're spending so much time with each couple's data. And I really felt like, and I don't want to like sound like I'm enacting a boundary violation here, but like I almost felt like I had like personal like insight and like relationships with them.
Mhm.
And it really was about that. Like, it was about them accepting me as a researcher and feeling comfortable with that. And me also really understanding them so that I was not misinterpreting what they were saying.
Mhm.
And I think, and the IPA people think that that's really better done with a more focused like sample size. It always makes people nervous when they see like qualitative and then they see like, yeah, 7, and they're like, well, how is this, reliable? Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. So can you tell me what does data analysis look like in this study? What does that process look like?
Time consuming,
Sure.
just being honest. It looks like many layers of analysis. I almost feel like a visual of like a spiral kind of. with each case. So you're spending a lot of time with each interview case, and you're sort of starting broad with the transcript, right? And noting and making, different types of comments. And then you're honing it into the themes that you're hearing from that case. And you're going over and over and over again, the audio, the written, the audio with the written, and my own sort of field notes I took after each interview, and understanding that, my own reflections from each interview. And so gradually each transcript for each interview just becomes this marked up thing, right? That looks really confusing, right, on the outside, but really it's become more focused. And that's how you create this commonality across interview cases. So you're going to do that with the first case. And as soon as you sort of exhaust that first case, then you can move on to the next one. And it was a really great feeling, actually, even though there were just 7. I had 9 recruited, but 7. It was a really cool feeling that as I went through, things started feeling similar. And that's how I knew I was coming up with themes across cases, as opposed to, well, just this couple said this, so this is going to end up being kind of an outlier, right? Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
How long did it take you from your first interview to feeling like you'd completed analysis?
I think the way things went, if I'm remembering correctly, my interviews ended up happening pretty close together, because we did the snowball sampling and word of mouth. And so I think what ended up happening is I would have like clusters of interviews, and people were able to schedule, pretty quickly. So the first round felt like the interviews happened quickly. And then I settled into the analysis, and that took several months of doing that. And then I was ready for, so we did 2 rounds. So the second round was a follow-up, like member check, making sure that each couple was in agreement with how I was interpreting their data, and what these sort of general themes were. So I didn't do that until I felt really comfortable with each interview case and felt like I was coming to some consensus around it. So months is the answer, I guess. Months. Yeah.
Great. And one last question. What did you learn from doing this study? Like, what did you learn about, obviously you went in with this passion and this interest and investment in trans women and their partners. So what did you learn about trans women and their partners from doing this study?
So a couple of things. I learned that the theories that I came in with are not horrible theories to think about working with this population, particularly attachment. I also learned that language is super important to trans including couples. And yes, I knew that ahead of time, right? But I didn't know that there were such relationship implications to like the use of that language. So for example, this idea of fairness that contextual theory uses. Fairness is a term that like contextual therapists sort of adopt because it's easier than talking to a client about their balance of relational ethics, right? Because clients are like, what the heck, right? But that term, people didn't attach to, like it didn't connect with them. And there were lots of minority stress reasons for that. And so I think that was a really important insight that like as a therapist, I need to be really mindful of that. And even though there's a piece of this theory that I use conceptually, I can still use that concept, right? But we really have to talk to couples about what that looks like for them. Just like you would any other couple, right?
Yeah.
But there's real implications here. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so the concept can still be relevant, but you have to find the language that resonates for that couple.
Exactly. And I think the participants in the study really taught me that. And so that was really, really important. I'm trying to think. So one thing I learned from a design standpoint and a sampling standpoint is, I guess, how important, and this is going to sound like a duh statement, like how important sample diversity is,
Mm,
and how difficult sometimes it is to get that,
mhm,
and how much harder researchers really do need to work in order to be able to have that. Because I see that as like probably the biggest limitation. Like every study has limitations, right? So that's the biggest one for me, that out of the 7 couples, like only 2 identified as biracial.
mm,
And so that really limited, um, what we understood,
mhm,
especially using a minority stress framework, right? Um, and there is other literature that focuses on trans women of color, right? And those recruitment strategies and sampling strategies are really different than what I had access to.
yeah,
So I think that was a really important learning for me too, that'll inform, future studies.
excellent. Thank you for that. And thank
Yeah,
you so much for giving us some of your time and talking about your study with us.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.